everyone, Panyo here. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of After Dinner Mints. I highly encourage everyone watching to join us in the Art Blocks Discord. A link to our Discord can be found in the description of this video. As always, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss an episode of our weekly show. And now, once introduced, our guest for this afternoon, we have generative artist Santiago.
Hey, how's it going, Ponyo?
It's going well. How are you doing today?
Cool, very good. Back at home in Europe and just like enjoying the summer. So yeah, all good, man.
Excellent, cool. Well, I really appreciate you carving out some time and talking to me today. We're gonna, go over a couple of your projects, but first, I would love for you to kind of just talk to us a little bit about your background.
For sure. So I'm the classic designer that transitioned into more technological kind of work. I've always, I studied design and art, and slowly I started getting interested in technology. It all came like very organically. I started discovering how via code you could modify a little bit like design, sort of like starting to bring it to life. And then little by little started working on like focusing more on that aspect of generative design or like procedural design. And finally, like jumping a bit more towards my last 7 years, I started working on the tech industry and especially on 3D graphics and basically working in like very like low level, like working with shaders, optimizing like very, very high optimization for 3D projects and like real-time 3D. And yeah, I've always had that thing behind me and like that passion to create. And little by little, I've been like slowly like putting more and more time aside for dedicating to actually art. And this year I've given it to myself to fully dedicate to that. Like I would like to dedicate fully into like to my art practice. And thanks to like, mostly thanks to the latest like all the NFT like phenomenon, if you want to say it like that, I've been able to actually get into that and dedicate myself fully into my art practice. So yeah, that's kind
Excellent.
of how I got here.
That's great. And I'm curious to know just a little bit more about, who were some of the artists that you kind of looked up to and inspired your work kind of early on.
Yeah, definitely like one that really created a difference and made me like understand like the richness of generative art was like Sol David. I know it's like a very, very common reference, but it's just because like the way in which he thought, like, I don't know, he's like a blend between minimalism, conceptual art, and the way in which he thought about his art is just like, it's extremely like close to what we do. It's just like in a completely different way, right? He just explained like, hey, this is how you execute my art. And it has like several points I really like. And one is that like his art is kind of eternal, like it can be replicated following his instructions, so it will live forever. And it's also like mutable and adaptable to different spaces. And I think that that's two things that fascinate me about him. And he coined this sentence that like the idea becomes the, what is it? I wrote it down. The idea becomes the machine that makes the art. And definitely this is like, yeah, it's basically describing, I believe, generative art. And yeah, it's one of the things that I'm more passionate about. And then a bit early on, I'm really fascinated by the Romanticism era. Like I've been studying it, and I've been always like, it really captivated me when I was studying art. I felt like very, very close to it, like both in subject and in the way in which they utilize light and composition. So I feel like a very strong like relation to it. Like, of course, in a more like modern approach, but that's definitely something that impacted me a lot.
Okay, excellent. And then what was your introduction into the NFT and crypto space?
Yeah, it was like I had no idea like what NFTs were, like sort of a year and a half ago, like something like that. And little by little, my Instagram started popping, like people commenting, like, "Oh, NFT, blah blah." And I was like, "What is this?" So I started doing some research, and I don't know, like it just clicked that finally, like there was sort of a way, like I'm especially interested on the on-chain NFT, like the idea of like being able to encapsulate code. Like if you tie it to Solver, it is a way of like in the end, code is like the container of ideas and concepts, and then it executes like visual, or could execute other things, but visual in our case, matter that express those ideas. So I found a way of like basically encapsulating what I believe is the art, right, the code, into a sort of package and a way of distributing it. And yeah, it really fascinated me and started researching, and little by little I started getting into this world a little bit. I found like it has many good things, and I wanted to take advantage of those.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. And then maybe you can talk to us and share a couple of those, early generative art pieces that you've created.
Sure. Let me just share my screen one sec. Okay. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yep, I see it right now.
Okay, so I have it over here. So I started with this series here, and this is like my first NFT. I wanted to talk about the relationship between technology and humans. So I use like oops, it's loading. Come on, load. Don't do this. Oh my god, this object like they never load. Oh man, what a fail. Anyway,
fine.
I'm gonna have to show that screenshot otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not loading.
Well, we can see it from the preview right there.
Okay, so very quickly, I wanted to talk about like how the relationship between human and machines, and how like every technological achievement, it seems to be like getting us closer to like towards singularity, or like in the end, it seems like we're sort of slaves of evolution in a way. So I created these like recursive like cellular automata, which here there's like these very like flashing GIFs, which is just a preview. But in essence, they are like evolving. I really would like to see it. Anyway, yeah, no, it's not gonna work. But in essence, what I wanted to do is like, because I was new to the NFT space, I started by minting like the first generation, and all of them are like hand minted. I know this could be added into a contract and just automate this task. But what I did is like generation 1 would be 1 Teso, generation 2 would be 2 Tesos, and just double the price each time. And I just wanted to see like how far would I get, and it was very interesting, like this idea of like, despite we could do it like in an automated way, like also the hand curation component of it. I felt that like finding the seed for each of these pieces like by hand and minting it by hand, I felt that had like this sort of counter to this like being a slave of technology, and like adding like a human factor into it. So yeah, and like I don't know, I'm currently on generation 10, which is this one here, and like basically every time like someone collects it, I just mint a new generation, and yeah, basically the price is doubled. I was also very curious to see like, like it's kind of like a very good measure of where you're at, or like how much acceptance you have on the space in a way. So yeah, I found it like pretty fun in that sense.
Yeah, I think I loved how you kind of mentioned, the technology and humans kind of like coming together. I think that's kind of what generative art is. It's just like humans and technology, creating art. And I think that's super powerful. Like, is there anything that you're really excited for just kind of in the future that maybe hasn't been, implemented or created yet? Is there anything that just like comes to mind?
I mean, it's a bit like sci-fi, but I was talking about this with my mom actually yesterday. Like we always talk about this kind of stuff, and I told her that like my dream would be to actually be able to, how like I don't know, like people are exploring on Neuralink, like basically like connecting directly like the brain towards like machines. It would be amazing to be able to have that as a delivery of art, like just like so pure that you can actually internally, like you don't even have to go through the eye filter, you don't have to go to any sense, just like be able to deliver art in that sense. That's very far away, but yeah, I'm really excited to see. I would like to see that. Other than that, no, I'm like pretty excited still with how like where the NFT space goes. Like I follow it as much as I can without getting like too involved with it, but I'm really like trying to see like where's a very very good, like trying to find a space within this whole ecosystem. So yeah.
I want you to kind of unpack maybe a little bit of the neural part, the neural like technology, and then, just us thinking creates the art. I mean, isn't that kind of, I don't know, for me, I find that kind of scary. So I'm kind of curious to know what, what you think, what your thoughts are about that.
You mean what I just said about delivering art directly?
Yeah, it's just like, I don't know, whatever you're thinking, then it like creates it. I don't know. You have to be in the right mindset, I guess.
Yeah, because otherwise like people could actually like end up reading your brain. I was talking more about like not so much me creating directly to that, but more like finding a way of like some sort of like, how like I'm saying that code is like the purest form of art in for me in generative art. Once like this code is executed, it kind of like in a way loses purity because it goes into like like a more tangible form. So like those ideas, like on every step of perception, like I feel that like every layer, there's a little bit more of like meaning and message that is being like sort of filtered and interpreted, which is awesome because like it's part of art, right? Interpretation. But at the same time, if for example, in my specific case, which I'm very interested on the messaging, I find that the more I can deliver a message in its purest form, the for me the better it would be. So in essence, like being able to remove stages of the stages of the way in which art is delivered, I feel that it would be an amazing thing. So yeah, I mean, of course, it was like super scary territory. Like I would like to see it, but I don't know like how comfortable I would be with like knowing that basically someone can like get into your brain and do things with it. But as a I don't know, as a fantasy or like a speculation, I feel that's like a cool thing that I would like to experiment with for sure.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm sure there'll be a lot of challenges, to get to that level, but it'll be an interesting path to get there. So
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I
very
know.
cool. I appreciate you sharing that. I'm curious to know if you could actually share your first ever NFT that you minted.
Hmm.
I think that's
Yeah.
always a good way to kind of see like what an artist was thinking, when they were first uploading something to the blockchain, and then how their art has kind of progressed.
Okay, well, the first NFT I minted was the one I just showed you, like
Oh, okay.
like
All
a
right.
triangle.
Perfect.
Sorry
Okay.
about that.
No, you're
Yeah, yeah.
good.
But
um,
sorry. Go ahead.
no, yeah. I was just gonna ask, when you are coding a project and you're kind of getting in that mindset, like where do you go for that inspiration? Is that something where, you have friends and family, you kind of have conversations, or maybe I know some people go to like spend time in nature, museums, parks, maybe visit some exhibits. Like where do you go for that inspiration?
Yeah, I mean, mostly like most of the work I do is like very like sort of intimate. It's very personal. So most of the work I normally do is just like thoughts that I don't know, like thoughts that like suddenly like I give a lot of like importance to, and then suddenly I feel like, oh, I just want to communicate this. I don't know who cares about this, but I just really want to put it out and just say it. And I'm not a good speaker or a good writer, so I feel that like in visual, I it's like the best medium for me for expressing those ideas. But when it comes to inspiration, it comes a lot from, I don't know, I have several friends back in the Bay Area. We always like hang out, go for a walk, and just like talk about like, this kind of like ridiculous thoughts of like, oh, what if we could like program the brain? Or what happens if like suddenly, like, I don't know, you could put in like, I don't know, you would like, I don't know, like all these like sort of like thoughts that like, like just giving freedom for like imagining and just talking conversations and seeing like how two different people can have like so different like views on like the consequences or the origin or things that could like happen only if we change a simple rule of our reality. Like those are normally like very good sources of inspiration for me. And of course, like I navigate a little bit like from time to time, like get into Twitter or like just look around what people are doing. And it's amazing. It's not so much inspiration, but motivation to see what other people are doing and seeing like other great artists, like what they're working on. And yeah, that's more a motivation. But yeah, inspiration comes a lot from just imagining things. What would happen if you suddenly change a little thing that we give for granted? Like it's just like fascinating.
Absolutely. I love that. Well, I want to talk about your first project on Art Blocks. It was Cosmodesias. And yeah, maybe we can just talk a little bit about, the concept behind the project.
Yeah, it started like so I work a lot with shaders. I use a lot of like Raymarch sign distance fields, which are like mostly like math. It's basically math applied to a space. It's a different way of rendering. Instead of meshes, what you do is you define volumes using like not math formulas, but describing volumes with just basically giving describing it mathematically in a way. I don't know how to say it correctly, but I wanted to use this in an approach of like what would happen if like suddenly we lived in or we found a region in space that it didn't conform to our physical rules, right? We live in like we understand through like we live in 3 dimensions. We have like a notion of what time is. Like it's like a sort of like a something that's constant and that kind of determines how our lives are lived. And I was thinking like what would happen if suddenly like there was a space that or we find like a region somewhere or like in in a remote space or whatever that would actually like not conform to those rules, and how reality would look on that space.
Got it. Great. And then, with the actual name Cosmodesias, is there any meaning to that project? Like, is there, maybe you got some inspiration from something? Can you let us know about that?
Yeah, the project was like very, I don't know, it looked very like spatial, very like, I don't know if you were put in a remote galaxy and suddenly like those like sort of like weird shapes were formed like out of like, destroying like all the physical rules that we understand. And Cosmodesias actually means just like, it comes from Latin, which is like or Greek. I'm never confused. I always mess those up. But it's like the measuring of, like, Decius is like the science of measuring, and cosmos is like the cosmos. So it was like sort of like a measurement of the cosmos. It was like an approach, like a more like, because this project was like very heavily mathematically based, was like, it kind of took that component of like, hey, this is like mathematically formulated, so it has actually like a capacity of being measured and understood with like an expression that can be written down. So yeah, it just came from that like translation, or that notion of being able to measure that.
Got it. And then for people that haven't kind of viewed this project before, you have to watch it in live view, because what's really cool about it is that the art is being, rendered live. It kind of just starts as like a simple shape, and then it kind of forms into, the final piece of art. Can you talk to us about like the process of, selecting those shapes and details that go into this?
Yeah. So I try always to, because like using code gives us the sort of privilege of creating, like animation, or having like, like we have like frames, we can like manipulate shapes and stuff like through time. I wanted this to be at least would be animated. Like I would love for it to be interactive, but because of the approach that it has technically, it's like a very heavy on the rendering side. So I couldn't afford to make it like interactive, or that you could navigate around it. But I definitely wanted to add like this motion component to it. So it feels like a slow, like a photography of slow exposure. And basically this is this like set of particles that are just running around and slowly exposing like the actual shape. There's several layers to it. Like there's a main shape, and then there's like a very, very faint atmosphere behind it, which is like, I mean, I couldn't get it on the static views, but if you look at the live version, you'll see that on the background, there's like this sort of like volumetric light that's hitting on the shape and creating like this sort of shadows, lights and shadows. And yeah, for me, like I always like try to, or all my work is always like interactive, or it's always like, for me, like the live view or the live component is very important. Like, of course, like the visual output and like the capacity to become like a static, like rich static image is important. But I always try to put like at least like will be an animation, or at least it will make sense that it's actually running for code, and I will take advantage of the nature of that thing, or the fact that it's actually capable of doing that.
Yeah, I love that. And I love how you kind of explained that it's kind of like an exposure, like a photographer, and a slow exposure to kind of like build the final product. I think that's just the perfect way to kind of explain that. Can you talk to us about how you locked in on the textures of the final project? Like, is that modeled after anything? I know you have kind of this, I don't know if it's like a sphere look, but then it's almost like a shell, like on the inside, and then there's other parts that kind of like wrap around it.
Yeah. So they all, I mean, so when you're working with these like pretty much like the sign distance fields, like normally what you have is like so you're defining everything. Basically, all the shapes are defined by just writing down like coordinates, and geometry. Geometries are defined by just writing down how rays of light should behave on the space. So it was just a matter of like, I started like I started working on like several of these geometries, to say it in a way, and I started filtering down until I got down to 4 of them, which are the ones that generate all the variations. And then what I did is I started like merging different geometries, but then also like once the geometry was created, also warping the space in different ways. So you will see some of them that are actually the same shape, but one of them is like an sort of like an oval that's being like intersected. But then also like when you twist it, it becomes like a sort of like wavy like two waves that are getting together. So in essence, like it's mostly like very like using very basic geometries. But then I'm also like using like several carvings, and there's also some that contain an enclosure made out of like circles. So they're all very basic geometries, but then they're like sort of complexified by adding like several layers of complexities. And then they're also used for rarity. Some of them contain an enclosure, some of them don't. And so yeah, it's just like very simple stuff that gets being complexified by this, like, hey, what happens if we warp the space in this like a spiral? What happens if we warp it like in, like, I don't know, the x-axis? So it's just playing with those sort of deformations, and that creates like that sort of like more surreal shapes and mood to it.
Got it. And then how do you go about selecting color palettes? And is like, do you go through a process? Is it inspired by, things you kind of see in your day-to-day life? Or is that kind of
Yeah.
just, have you kind of worked, you have these like set of palettes that you work throughout projects?
Yeah. Oh, so to be honest, like I mostly work in black and white, and I was encouraged to try to use some color because, like, and it's something that's very interesting on the generative space, how the idea of variation is very important, and color seems to be like a very straightforward approach to achieving this variation. But for me, which I mostly work on black and white, is like normally like a sort of struggle. And I did it as an experiment. So I added like slight variations of color into this one. And I took advantage to create also rarity out of them. And actually it was a very good idea, because not a good idea, but I'm happy that I tried it, because it ended up being like, I like the results a lot. So I added like basically like one variation that's a color ramp that uses like hue saturation, but there's no inspiration to it. There's no magic to it. It's just like pure like formulation of color. So one of them is a gradient that ramps from like, it just ramps the hue 10% from the shape, so it will create like a sort of gradient from left to right. There's another variation which creates like a silver sort of mood, has like introduces a little bit of blue and like intensifies the whites to create more sharpness and a little bit more of like a more metal look to it. And there's a gold variation, which is like the most rare of them. There's only 3 of them, and that one, yeah, it's basically like creates the illusion of gold. But yeah, again, like I'm not too strong on color, to be honest, and I feel much more comfortable working with shape, and I never give too much importance to the color, to be honest.
Got it. Okay, great. Well, I think I always find that really interesting, because everyone looks at it, a little bit different. Maybe, their day-to-day life, they have exposure to so many different, maybe it's like nature, but I think I think you definitely stay true to like what you enjoy, kind of with that project.
Yeah. No, I see several artists that are like really good using colors. Like, for example, William Mapan, like his way of utilizing colors, or like recently Martin Grasser, like the way in which they use colors is like, I mean, they have this something to seeing like how to blend them together, and it's admirable. But yeah, it's something I don't have, so yeah, I don't use it.
Yeah, that's totally fine. And how do you know when, like for this specific project, Cosmodesias, how do you know that the project is complete? Like, is there, I feel like that's probably got to be the biggest challenge for, generative artists, because at some point, I know you can fine tune and, make it better and better over time, but it's like, how do you know when it's complete?
Yeah, when it's time to submit to our blocks, it's complete. No, it's normally so it starts in 2 ways, right? It starts like either I have a very clear idea of where I want to go, and when I reach it, I just stop. Or sometimes like by experimenting on some other projects, something pops up. I just take a screenshot, and then I analyze why I really like this thing. Like when I see something, it's like, why do I like it? And then try to find a meaning to it, and then like just iterate until that becomes something that's explainable, that can become something that can be understood by other people, and that explains the story. But in the case of Cosmodesias, was like mostly I don't know if it happens to, I think it happens to a lot of us, that is just like getting to the 90% of the project. It tends to be like very fast, and like you iterate and suddenly like you reach that 90%, and then that last 10% is always a struggle. And I don't know, I normally give myself like a specific amount of time, and I try to just like not overthink it. And when I'm at this 90%, I know that 10% is gonna it can make a huge impact, but in the end, like I feel that the messaging, which is for me the most important part, is gonna remain more or less the same. So I try to just close it up. Like I try to focus a lot on performance, which like sadly on my work it tends to be like an issue because I utilize a GPU very intensely. So I try to look into that, make sure that like the most amount of people are gonna be able to enjoy that, and then that it just like it will render nicely on like most surfaces. And whenever those tests are complete, I tend to give it for done. Like it's always difficult because like one day after you're always like, oh, I could make this better, blah blah blah. In the end, it's like you could be doing that forever, and at some time you have to like drop your pencil or whatever, close your laptop, and say like that's it.
Got it. And something that I'm really that's really important to Art Blocks is proceeds from a lot of these projects go to charities and organizations that are meaningful to the artists. And I just wanted to highlight that a portion of the proceeds from this project went to Multiple Sclerosis International Federation. And I'm curious to know, like, what is the meaning of the organization to you, and why you selected that specific organization?
Yeah, I mean, this was mostly because, well, my sister, she has multiple sclerosis, and she's been living with it for a long time. Like we've had in the family. She's good, luckily, but it's like a very like shitty like sickness. Basically, like you never know how it's gonna evolve. Like no one has still found a cure, although there's been a lot of like progress lately. There's no cure for it, and like you never know when it's gonna hit and how hard it's gonna hit. And it's a very like degenerative, like very messy signal. So yeah, I felt like it touched really close. So I wanted to like just try to contribute a little bit into research for that.
Excellent, cool. I really appreciate you sharing that. I think I always love hearing kind of like the stories of why artists select a specific charity, and obviously this one's like it's super meaningful to you. So I appreciate that.
For sure.
Well, yeah, maybe now's a good opportunity for you to share screen. Maybe you can talk a little bit about some of your favorite mints from this project, or maybe some mints that surprise you.
Yeah, for sure. Let me open the project. Sorry. So yeah, I mean, like mostly on this. Wait. Yeah, mostly for this project. I mean, it was my first project in Arblox, and like once I saw like all the mints together, it was like a really magical moment. I don't know why, but it feels like when you see them up there, are like really really cool. Like as I was saying before, like for me, like the use of color was like one of the like first times that I actually think seriously about color. And as I was telling you before, like one of the variations is just basically a ramp from the like it's ramping the gradient from like left to right, and showing this sort of like this sort of gradient that runs across the piece. But the ones I definitely appreciate a lot, and one of the things I was grateful that I decided to use color is mostly because like the gold ones, I don't know, I have like I feel that they I don't know, they just felt right. They just highlight the geometries really nicely.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then like I don't know, like this like, and also like this sort of slow exposure, like these highlights that are produced over here, they suddenly like start popping up. They define like very well, like all these like sort of like curvy and like messy geometries that are generated on this region. So yeah, for me like those were a surprise to see, and like one of the things that I was glad to experiment with something and get out of my comfort zone. That's like always like this sort of like black and white like environment. And suddenly experimenting with like the use of color. This one's definitely my favorite. I don't know why, but like this sort of enclosure here, like it kind of creates like this enclosure that's like completely like broken on the front, and you can see this pure geometry inside. It looks like, I don't know, like a pearl, like some sort of like thing that's captured within like a space. And this one is like by far one of my favorite ones. So yeah, I appreciate this one. Sorry.
That's awesome. And I'm curious to know, actually, when you were showing us that piece, I was interested to know a bit more about how do you figure out the timing of the rendering? Like when you hit live, it sounds like it takes maybe 2-3 seconds potentially to, to kind of fully render. And I'm curious to know, like, how did you think about the actual timing of that?
Well, partially was a necessity, because like in the end, these are like a bunch of particles that are fed into a feedback loop, and they're slowly drawing the lines using like a volume reference that I've pre-rendered before. And like if you go very fast, like those lines will start like breaking, or they will start creating like, dashes or spaces. And if you go very slow, it's just like, it's too slow. So basically it was a matter of finding like the right approach for these lines to be drawn perfectly. But also like I wanted to create like if you leave it, like if you, at some point I stopped the rendering, like I think it's something around like 200, I think it's 260 frames, something like that. And after that point, like it just starts to, because there's also like all these particles are being like added, like the colors are being added on top of each other. So if you leave it for more time, it just starts to get like too messy and like very, very cluttered with shapes. You don't see so much the definition of these lines. So for me, that was the perfect point, was to stop the render and decide like, hey, this is the amount of time. And also like I just felt right, that the right amount of time in which like, you don't have to stay there waiting forever, but also doesn't like pop up immediately. So it creates this sort of like anticipation every time you start seeing more and more detail of it. And it kind of like makes you wait a little bit until you actually see the whole thing, but not too much that you will be like, next. So yeah, that felt like the right amount of time.
Got it. And, with that being your first project, and, you're kind of saying how when you started seeing them for the first time, it might have felt good. Like, I'm curious to know, were you really nervous? Because obviously whatever, is minted, it's like, it's permanent, it's like out there forever. Was there did you have any doubt that like, maybe something would go wrong since this is your first project, or what was that feeling?
On the first one, on the second one, there's always like that, like, oh, it's like, is it gonna be liked or not? But like little by little, especially, and we can talk about this later, but my on the first project of Arblox, like, because like Arblox is such a big like platform, like, I mean, in the end, it's like the reference for generative art right now, and there's a lot of eyes on it. Like, yeah, it was like a lot of anxiety. There's one anxiety of like, I mean, fortunately, Arblox is a very robust platform when it comes to like testing. There's a lot of like, there's testing. There's like a phase in which like we test that technically everything is working perfectly. So I was pretty sure that it was going to work great in the technical aspect. But on the part of like, if people are going to understand, like it, etc., that created a lot of anxiety. And then like having to introduce this project and just like, opening it up to collecting and just seeing like, is anyone gonna get this? Is anyone gonna like it? That always creates like this sort of like anticipation and anxiety that like, it feels really good, but at the same time, like, definitely like the days before that, it was like, yeah, you get very anxious about it.
Yeah, I can totally understand. All right, your latest project on Artblocks is called 319. There's so much I want to talk about this, but just with the total mint size, the Dutch auction, but maybe you can kind of tell us a little bit about the idea behind this project.
Yeah. So I mean, this was I mean, this project was for me sort of it was a very, it's interesting in many aspects for me, like personally, because like it was a point in which I had to decide like what kind of artist I wanted to be, and in the end, like for me, like that has a very, very strong meaning. But like going backwards, like 319 is basically, I've always felt very fascinated by time. I was talking before about romanticism, and you know how romantics always like regarded like nature as this big thing that you cannot do anything to stop it. You can just like stay there and just go through it. Like you cannot like stop a storm coming towards you, and this causes like a sense of fear. But at the same time, it's like in the end, it's like this sort of fear and this not being able to control it is like something really beautiful. It produces like a very like I don't know, like a very intense emotion into you. So for me, like this is like what time has, like the fact that reality is conformed out of time. Like when we're born, we only have time. So for me, time is a big, very big subject, and I wanted to talk about this. So I found this like chapter on the Bible, like this verse on the Bible. I don't read the Bible too much, but I find it a fascinating, like mythological book, which is chapter 3, verse 19, which talks about like it's when Adam and Eve are expelled from the Garden of Eden, and they're like condemned to be immortals. So whenever you understand your mortality, and you understand that the amount of time that you have on Earth is limited. You suddenly understand that the present probably, I mean, you need to enjoy the present, but also you cannot give it that much importance, because in the end, we all are going to end up on the same place. So for me, this project was wanted to talk about this, like, how do I feel about like my time on Earth, and also like it talks a little bit on where I want to be in the future. That's why I decided, like, mid-project. At the beginning, I was doing like more like, oh, let's make like, I don't know, starting to count how many editions I'm going to make, all this kind of stuff. And one day I decided, like, no, this has to be like a very limited amount of editions. If it was up to me, I probably would have done 9 or something really extreme. We ended up doing 19 because the 319 trying to play a little bit with the title. But for me, it was very important to think, like, where do I want this piece to be in the future? Like, like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, because we live on, especially because the culture inside the NFT space is like so immediate, and it's so like, like what's happening right now. I thought, like, where do I want this piece to be like 5 years from now, 10 years from now? And I knew I wanted to be like on a sort of like on a special place. I want to look back at it and be like, I'm proud I did this thing, and after 10 years, I still want this piece to be valuable for me, at least. Also, in the sense of like collectors, like I thought this piece like very, very specifically for collectors that would understand this idea. I wanted this piece to be collected and kept, not so much like be traded. Like from my previous project, like when I go in and I see like, I don't know, like the floor price going like this, I see people just like selling like their trading cards. I understand that we're tokenizing art, and that's part of the game, and I fully accept it, and I'm glad that it works. But I thought to myself, like, do I want to be part of this or not? Like, how much do I want to be part of this? So in a way, like this like low mint amount is like a sort of countermeasure for this, in like at least an attempt as a countermeasure for this, or at least like a way of making, like, trying to make, if you collect this, like it's not going to be that easy to be suddenly something that's like being traded up and down, and for me that was something that, I don't know, it kind of like touched into like all these thinking about like where I am right now and what I want to be and what I'm doing right now and what I wanted to signify in the future. I don't know if this made any sense, but like,
no, that makes total sense. I appreciate you sharing that. And I think a really cool feature is that if you use the arrow keys on your computer, it kind of changes the years feature of the mint. And I know you mentioned time, and what does that actually do to the actual mint itself? Like, how does that when you change it, left and right, up and down? Like, how does that, when the years change, how does that affect the mint?
So so in order to represent all this notion of time, I use these like rocks, because like for me it was a very strong symbol, right? Like when we think about rocks, we think about something that doesn't change. We would never imagine that a rock started like a piece of sand and started like creating like sort of sediments and layers of dust, and in the end it creates these beautiful patterns that when you look at them are actually like geological layers, and they're like the footprint of billions of years of evolution. So I wanted to do this game with the arrow keys that would provide like certain, like a little bit of like more richness. It wouldn't be like that static piece, but it would actually exemplify like how, like in the same way that I'm talking about rocks as like the unavoidable, like proof that like the march of time is unavoidable. I also wanted to show that using the arrow keys and showing how like this sort of time started like at something started as a very, very simplistic thing and started getting complexified until what it is right now. And despite we don't see that time is moving and evolving, like it's something that's happening and it's unavoidable. So the arrows are just like trying to express a little bit more of this idea. It's sort of like a hidden feature in a way. But I feel that in a way also I think the animation that it creates is pretty nice, like this deformation, and I feel that's very like, it's like very pleasing to see. But at the same time, I feel that it kind of tied in with this notion and this idea of time very tightly. So yeah, I decided to put it in.
Great. And so I know you mentioned also that 319. So this was a 19 total mints. It's a multi-day Dutch auction over the course. I know it was like supposed to be over the course of 3 days. It ended, on the second day. But so with that being said, did you come up with the actual name of the project first, or is it more of like the idea of the project and then it kind of tied in with the name?
No, I mean, I came first with this wanting to explore the subject of time first. Then I found this passage on the Book of Genesis that I think it spoke very well about how I thought about time. And then this Dutch auction part, it started just like an idea of, okay, so this project has a tiny part that maybe I haven't spoke about, which is a little bit of criticism against all the immediacy that the NFT space generates. Like this, a little bit of shallowness sometime on how we look at art. We just look at it as like we just look at the shape, we just look at the form. We don't really like dig in and think like, oh, let's read what this piece means and like what this artist is about and like what he wants to say. So it was a little bit of criticism towards that. So I wanted to put like something in place that would actually like make you think or really like meditate if you really want to collect this and why. And I felt that like creating a long Dutch auction and starting with a very, very high like starting. I mean, I'm not dumb. Like I know that starting price was completely unrealistic, but it was a way of ensuring that this Dutch auction like would last, it will be pretty long. And the idea of the three, like, I don't know, it came from like we got it from the title also, like the first three. So we decided to do this Dutch auction that would last 3 days, and it would just be like, it would just reinforce the concept of this like time, like reflecting upon like what we do with time and like how I would like at least art to be like more meaningful and like our actions more purposeful. So yeah, the decision was like mostly put in place to sustain this idea. And yeah, I mean, it was fun, but the first day was pretty harsh. Like, just like probably is like the piece that has taken longer to do a first mint in our vlogs, I'm guessing. But yeah, like the first night was like, oh, what's happening? But yeah, unfortunately, like some people collected it and it was fun.
Yeah, were you? I'm curious to know actually. Were you up? Because obviously this goes over the course of more than a day. Like, were you up when the first pieces started coming through?
No, I mean my girlfriend was up and she woke me up. I was like, hey, someone collected. I was like, hey, I'm sleeping. Just like, yeah, it will be there 2 hours. Just let me sleep.
Yeah,
Because I was pretty tired that day. But no, I mean, I obviously whoever says that they're not following their auctions will be a lie. So yeah, it was like all the time, like just checking in, like what's happening. But at some point, I just realized that that's what I wanted. So like in the end, like I just let go, like just decided to enjoy like like dinner, just spending like just happened that weekend we were just traveling around, so decided to enjoy like the place that we were at, and then like just went to sleep. And fortunately, I think it was more or less at my 5-6 a.m. like the first meet happened, and then after that it like progressively, like on a very short span of time, like all the others came through.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I was sleeping when the first one came in, so I missed that.
Well, I'm glad you're able to get some sleep. I'm sure that's got to be tough. Like you said, it's nice that you were out, enjoying yourself.
Yeah.
Well, color palettes for this specific project. I know you mentioned that black and white. That's kind of like your go-to, and you kind of explored a couple colors. But I noticed, in this project, in some of these rock formations, there's definitely like a really nice variety of colors, and I'm curious to know how you went about that for this project.
Yeah, for this one, at the beginning I started black and white as always, and then I started introducing like one color here and there. Like I like a lot of the black and white, like dominantly black and white, and then sometimes I just like one tiny hint of color. That's also something that tends to be nice, and it's also easy for someone that doesn't use color too much. But for this one, I felt that, especially because we're talking about like I wanted this thing to look like inevitably as a rock, like it had to be a rock. So I felt that colors actually helped a lot into like communicating this idea, although in the end it ended up turning into a little bit more of like a fantasy color palette. But in the end, I felt that they felt very good. And also like it was very important for me to show these sort of layers of time from the rock, and I felt that the colors help a lot to understand like how these layers occur and how they expand through the whole object. So yeah, I had to do some research. I found like, I mean, to be honest, like I googled color palettes. Okay, that's how basic I am with color, and I just like did some research. I looked for some sources, and I found like I just collected like I think at the beginning a collection of 100 color palettes. I simulated most of them into thumbnails, and then I started styling into the ones that I like the most. Then I discovered that like blending through a LCH color space instead of HSL as I was normally doing, like it basically like it's more it's a color space that conforms more to how we actually see colors. Like when you use hue saturation levels, like there's commonly, like in color theory, like saturation tends to pollute a little bit like the level also, like more saturated colors look brighter. And in ACL, like normally that's like sort of neutralized in a way. So I used that color space to blend between them. And in the end, yeah, I ended up with I think it's like something around 23 color palettes that I liked. They're like there's 4 colors to each of the palettes, and then 3 of them are picked randomly and then blended together.
Got it. And, obviously with such a low mint size, obviously there's a strong possibility, depending on how many different features you have and how you set up your algorithm, that something doesn't show up. Was that the case in this project? Was there anything
Yeah.
that, you set up that you thought might come out of the minter, but it didn't?
Totally. Yeah, totally. I mean, not like any like rarity that I didn't want to add. Like actually, like it was very weird because like the rarity was supposed to be on black and white, and there's more black and white mints than color. So that was like pretty awkward to see. But yeah, I think that I found like when I decided to mint only 19 editions, I found like there was a very like sort of like poetic thing into it. That was like, this thing was intended to be like, I don't know, 300, 400, like easily iterations. And there's like 23 color palettes. There's like 4 shape generators. There's like there's many things put in place for this to be a project that could have like a huge range of variation. But I found that was very beautiful to have those sort of like, unrealized, like sort of a potential that could have happened, and they suddenly become like, trapped into like, they just become like voided. They just become like they will never happen, and only 19 of those actually happen. So I found there was like this project could be like probably half of the color palettes, like only like 1 shape generator, and it would create enough variety for 19 editions. But I found that was like very beautiful, the fact that, I don't know, like 300 potential variations would never happen. They would just get trapped on time. So I found that was like a cool thing to have. And yeah, it was interesting I think that it's like a very sort of internal joke with myself, but I found that was like a nice thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously with this being an interactive piece, how do you prefer the art to be displayed? If collectors were to ask you like, hey, like, what is your vision for how these should be displayed? Is it more of a
Yeah.
print and maybe like a digital screen, or how do you see that?
Yeah, I never think on print, honestly. I like the digital space. Like I like the pixels. Like for me are like what I do, and how I intend things to be seen. Like of course if they can be printed, that's a plus, but no, like it will be always on a screen. Like there's been a lot of like I've read on like some of the channels and art blogs, like a lot of people complaining about the GPU usage. It's really intense on the GPU. So and that's the reason for that is that I intended this to be an exhibition piece. I wanted this piece to be like exhibited. So in the end, like it needs a certain set of requirements, which is a strong GPU, proper display with a nice color calibration. So yeah, for me it would be like a screen, like ideally a portrait, like in a portrait, which is like how I ended up like creating those. And then like potentially it would be amazing to see it like also from time to time, sort of like time shifting. So I created an exporter. I think it's linked on the site, or otherwise I think I posted it on some channel. But there's an exporter that allows collectors only to export a high resolution video of their mint, and it's basically like the whole process of navigating through time along 10 seconds. So it would be beautiful to see like the piece just like as static, and every, I don't know, every minute suddenly like shifting through time and going back into its final shape. That would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you kind of hinted a little bit about like these are meant to be, exhibited. Are there any plans, or maybe in the near future that where you plan to have like an exhibit with these pieces?
I mean, I would love to. Like, I mean, I keep trying, but like sadly, I keep being rejected. But I really try to get out of the exclusively like, this sort of like closed circle, which is like the space in which we are, and like trying to get it more out there. It's just like right now there seems to be a lot of like it's still very early, so the NFT space is still like a little bit like in conventional galleries, it's a little bit like like it's not too liked anymore too much. And then like, yeah, I mean, there's opportunities to exhibit this, and I would definitely love to exhibit my work somewhere else. And I'm always like looking around if there's any arts grants or any exhibitions that I could participate in. I feel that, I mean, like besides like Cosmodesias and 319, I have like several other pieces that I also would like to show. And yeah, I would love to take my work out of this like exclusively like sort of collectible experience and put it out there for people to see. Like I would love to have that opportunity someday.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's such a, beautiful story between both projects, and I would love to, hopefully one day see these in exhibit like you've kind of mentioned.
Yeah,
So
hopefully.
yeah, absolutely. Well, maybe now's a great time if you're able to kind of share, some of those favorite mints, or maybe some of those mints that kind of surprised you from 319.
Yeah, I mean, on 319, I mean, I'm gonna share. Uh, Okay, so for 319, because it's such a short edition, there's really I didn't get like many like surprise mints. Like this was like the zero, like the one I minted, which is like a very like weird strong sort of like color palette. But for the other ones that came up, like as I was saying, like the black and white, which is this like it's this one over here. This one was supposed to be like a rarity. And I think that it actually came up like 3 times. Yeah, that's a second one in black and white, and that's a third one in black and white. That was like super
Okay.
surprising. And then there's like I don't know. I saw like I think like my favorite one is this one over here. It's like it has like the more like muted palette to it. Like it has like very low contrast between like the color shapes. But for me, like it has like one of the most interesting shapes out there. Like this is like by far my favorite out there. And then there's like these like more sort of like fantasy color ones, like this one over here. That this one actually introduced it in the last moment. I wasn't very sure about it, but I really like how like the outside is completely like white, and then in the inside it's like super colorful. So yeah, this color scheme right here is one of like also my favorite like ways of creating these shapes.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that was the one where you kind of mentioned, it was more of like a fantasy color. I really enjoy it. I think it's a really, really nice touch, and it just adds like some complexity, like additional complexity to the project, which, I really enjoy. So, well, I'd love for, moving past, 319. I have a couple other questions before we wrap things up. I'm curious to know, as you are a generative artist, and as you're growing and exploring more art and building more art, are there any techniques that you're hoping to learn and use for future projects?
Honestly, yeah, I'm super comfortable with WebGL and more like the JavaScript approach. So I tend to go always into that. Like I've been exploring artificial intelligence like a lot, like basically like trying all the like lately there's been a lot of like talk about Midjourney and DALI and like all these like AI art. It's just that I still haven't found the space on that sort of technology that I feel entirely comfortable with. Like I tend to believe a lot that the tool that you use will very greatly determine what you end up doing. So I give a lot of importance to the tool that you use. And now that I feel that I mean, I'm going to say mastered. Of course, there's people that are like way more proficient with it. But now that I feel really comfortable with one, because I tend to give a lot of importance into the messaging whenever I'm doing something, like whenever the tool allows me to work fast and iterate fast, I tend to stay very, very like very I tend to abuse that tool a lot and don't go too much into other territories. Like I've always wanted to go a little bit more into other 3D software like Cinema 4D and stuff like that, but I normally use Blender in a very rudimentary way for certain stuff. So no, I say that like probably I'm probably gonna stay on WebGL for now, and I'm not too much researching into other platforms right now or other technologies so far.
Mm-hmm. Great. And I know you mentioned earlier that, the time and how important and how interesting that is to you. And obviously time for ourselves, as you as an artist, I'm curious to know, I think mental health is, so important in this space with things traveling so fast, as you kind of mentioned. how do you wind down after a project is fully minted, or maybe even during the process of creating a project?
Yeah, on this side, like I know like mental health is super important, and that's something I do really wrong, but I tend not to wind down too much or to stop too much. Like I always get like a lot of FOMO. Like when you go into Twitter, you go into any space, you start seeing like lots of people doing many fascinating things, and you get like a lot of FOMO. You just want to keep going. It feels like you're always behind, so it's very very difficult to stop. So I mean, I always have like this sort of like sacred pause during the day. That's like I always go for a walk, just like enjoy like space. Like I'm lucky to have in San Francisco a lot of places to go and just move around. And it's like a beautiful scenery to just explore. But other than that, I tend to dedicate most of my time to either working on a project that I'm doing or researching into new ones. And most of my posts are like just like tiny road trips and just like enjoying like around where I live, or daily like a pause between like I don't know between blocks of work that will allow me to just rest and maybe like just pause things for a little bit and then catch them later with a more like refreshed mind. But I don't do like many large vacations or anything like that. It's just like it's not like I don't really enjoy them because I'm always like thinking like, oh shit, I should be working on this on that. So I don't enjoy them too much. So yeah.
Got it. Great. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. Well, and how could people reach you should they have any questions? This is maybe a good time if you have any social media plugs that you want to mention.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in Twitter. I'm glitch live with an underscore in between both words, and on Instagram I'm Santi Santi with 4 underscores on each side. So I have to change that someday, but yeah, most names are taken. And I'm always around Discord. Like since I discovered it because of art blogs, and after that, like I started using it more and more. So I'm always on Discord, and I don't know my username on Discord. Yeah, I'm Santiago with a dot in the end. And yeah, people can always find me there. Probably I've become like a Discord guy now. So yeah, those are the 3 main ways.
Great.
And then I have like
know... Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I'm just working on like it's not the best way to see my work, but like soon I'll have like a portfolio ready, like a personal website that's gonna be proper-code.com. So yeah, that's also another way if people feel like just looking at some other work. But like I feel that most of the work now goes into Twitter or Instagram. So I feel that's the most up-to-date stuff.
Well, we'll include all of those links inside of the show notes for, the YouTube description. So cool. For anyone that's tuning in, make sure you check out the description and check out all those great resources. Well, Santiago, I really, really appreciate you being on After Dinnerments. It's been such a pleasure just speaking with you about your projects and obviously learning more about your background. So I appreciate you being on today.
Yeah, man, thank you so much. And like, yeah, I always say it, but like, it's cool that all the team at Arblogs are supporting us and etc. So like, huge thanks. And yeah, it was a pleasure to talk to you.
Absolutely, yeah, pleasure's all mine. And look forward to talking to you soon.
Yeah, hopefully.
Just to let everyone know, we have an After Dinnerments podcast. It's available weekly. All of our shows that are recorded on YouTube are actually extracted into a YouTube podcast format. So make sure you check out Google, Spotify, Amazon, all those great podcast suppliers. Finally, we have a weekly newsletter that gets delivered once a week with information on upcoming drops and generative art related news. You can find a link to the newsletter in the description of this YouTube video. Again, I want to thank Santiago for joining me today on After Dinnerments. I really appreciate you being on. For anyone that's tuning in, make sure you comment, like, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Be kind to each other, buy what you love, and we will see you all next week. Thanks, Santiago. I appreciate it.
Bye. Thank you.